Zo. Test, test, test. Yes. Ja. Dankjewel, dankjewel. Ik zal even deze stoel even dichterbij neerzetten. Hoe is het, lieve mensen? Ja, een beetje bijkomen? Ja, hè? Ja, ik had al zo lang geen goede muziek gehoord. Live, weet je wel. Het is dan coronacrisis en alles. En ik dacht, ja, hier moeten we nog even van genieten, toch? Dat is een goede beslissing, toch? Ja, toch? Goede beslissing. Hey, nogmaals een hele goede middag allemaal. Ik zeg dat altijd en dan wacht ik. Ik doe het altijd als een groep 3 activiteit. Hè. Goedemiddag allemaal. Ja, dankjewel. Ja, voor de 15 mensen. Ja, dankjewel. Ja, goed. Jullie hebben groep 3 gehaald. Ik zal mezelf even voorstellen. Mijn naam is Mehmoud Hassan Hersi Abdurrahman Abdouala Isse. Dus, Mo, een stuk makkelijker voor jullie. Ja. Ik ben de comedian van vandaag. Ik mag vandaag een stukje comedy doen voor Afrikadag. En ik voel me erg vereerd om hier te zijn ook natuurlijk. Want de hele dag door heb je heel veel grote intellectuele mensen die jarenlang gestudeerd hebben. En ik niet. En ik sta hier ook op het podium. Dat kan ook, hè. Dus de kunst, hè. De kunstvormen. Ik ben daar heel trots op dat ik hier mag staan. Als comedian. Dus ik wacht op het applaus. Ja, dat is heel goed. Ik wil jullie graag een beetje een stukje meenemen wat ik allemaal mee heb gemaakt in de afgelopen tijd. En de coronacrisis is best positief geweest voor mij. Sommige mensen snappen het nog niet. Maar tijdens de coronacrisis ben ik gaan samenwonen. Ik heb een relatie gekregen en samen gewonnen. We hebben een huis gekocht. We zijn gaan verbouwen. En ik ben nu verloofd. En sinds een aantal weken ben ik vader geworden. Het is heel mooi dat jullie klappen. Ik was eergisteren in Amsterdam-Oost. Helemaal geen klap. Helemaal geen klap. Dat is normaal. Het is heel normaal om baby's te hebben. Maar voor mij is het best wel een unieke situatie om vader te zijn. Het is mijn allereerste baby ook. En mijn vrouw, ik heb een Nederlandse vrouw. En we hebben 2 verschillende culturen. Want ik kom oorspronkelijk uit Ethiopië. Ik zie sommigen denken ook, jeetje, jij bent wel het meest zwaarste Ethiopië die ik gezien heb tot nu toe. Sommige mensen lachen iets te hard op die grap. Iets te hard. Rustig aan. Ik sta hier nog. Mijn ego staat hier ook nog, hè mensen. Kalm aan. Nee, ik kom uit Ethiopië en mijn vrouw is Nederlands. En we hebben een soort van 2 verschillende culturen, hè, die dan af en toe botsen en af en toe clashen. Maar nu hebben we onze zoon. Maar ja, het was natuurlijk wel spannend, die coronaperiode. Want toen zij nog zwanger was, hadden onze ouders elkaar nog niet ontmoet. Want er was corona, het kon allemaal nog niet. En die eerste ontmoeting tussen de ouders van mijn verloofde en mijn Afrikaanse moeder. Spannend, joh. Want de ouders van mijn verloofde, die spreken niet zo goed Nederlands. Die komen namelijk uit Zonne en Breugel. Het is een klein dorpje in Brabant, voor wie het niet weet. Ja, heel klein. Maar het was heel bijzonder, want mijn moeder zei ook na afloop tegen mij van... Mehmoud, hoe hebben deze mensen een inburgeringscursus gehaald? En waarom zeggen ze steeds voodoo? Hebben ze familie in Nigeria of zo? Ik zeg nee, maar ze zeggen houdoe. Is iets anders. Ja. Maar het is ook heel bijzonder voor mij om gewoon deze dag mee te maken. Ook changing the narrative, changing the conversation in Afrika. En als ik daaraan denk ook, aan de titel van Afrikadag, dan denk ik eigenlijk weer terug aan mijn jeugdperiode. Waarbij je door gesprekken eigenlijk een hele andere kant op kan gaan. En mijn jeugd, en de afgelopen periode hebben wij ook best wel een zware periode meegemaakt met corona natuurlijk. En ik zat ook in een dip, maar ik moest altijd terugdenken aan mijn jeugdperiode. En die was best bizar, kan ik je vertellen. Want toen wij gingen vluchten uit Ethiopië, toen kwamen wij hier in Nederland terecht. Allereerst, we moesten vluchten uit Ethiopië vanwege de burgeroorlog met het buurland Eritrea. En die burgeroorlog die was ontstaan omdat er op de grens tussen de 2 landen er een nieuwe IKEA gebouwd werd. Die moesten we gezamenlijk in elkaar zetten. En met de handleiding van de Pax Kledingkast. Oorlog. Ja, een paar mensen hebben een Pax Kledingkast in elkaar gezegd, zie ik. Die er heel veel last van hebben. Nee, maar ik weet het niet. Heel veel mensen vragen mij, hoe was die oorlog begonnen? Ja, what the fuck, ik was 3, man. Waar heb je het over? Ja, dat weet ik toch niet meer. Maar toen wij naar Nederland toe kwamen, toen was het heel bijzonder. Want ja, wij kwamen in een AZC terecht naast het ponypark Sagaren. En dat is heel bijzonder, hè? Want ja, wij komen uit Ethiopië. Heb je daar echt alle wilde dieren van de wereld. Hè? Je hebt de olifanten, neushoorn, en je hebt de giraffen, alles lopen. En dan zie je voor het eerst een pony. Ja, dat is raar. Want wij hadden echt een heel ander beeld ook van Europa. Ook, hè? We hadden echt een ander beeld in de zin van... ja, weet je wel, Europa, welvaart, rijkdom. En dan zie je opeens een half paard. Wij dachten echt, deze Nederlanders zijn arm. Ze kunnen gewoon geen heel paard bestellen. Wat is dit nou voor iets raars? En mijn vader die wilde juist dat wij contact gingen maken, hè, met die Nederlandse witte kinderen. Ik zeg ook expliciet wit en niet blank. Want die kinderen die wij zagen, die zagen er slecht uit, joh. Helemaal wit en zo, geen kleur op hun gezichten. En mijn vader keek naar die kinderen en die zei... Stafrullah, stafrullah. Allah heeft deze kinderen vervloekt. Ze hebben gewoon geen kleur op hun gezichten, gewoon helemaal niks. Echt, ja, een paar mensen kunnen erom lachen. Het is een joke, mensen, het is een joke. Ja. Maar in die periode waar ik aan terugdenk is eigenlijk de verandering van mijn leven. Want wij waren na het AZC, verhuisden wij naar Dedemsvaart toe. En van Dedemsvaart gingen wij opeens naar Almere. Omdat mijn oudste broer Yusuf, die ging heel goed voetballen. Die kreeg een profcontract bij Ajax. En Ajax kocht een huis voor ons, ook in Almere. Ja, dat was heel bizar ook. Hè. Hij was opeens een profvoetballer. En bij Ajax is het zo dat als zij daar talent in de familie hebben... dan kijken ze ook nog eventjes of er in de broertjes en zusjes ook nog talenten zitten. En ik heb ook bij Ajax gevoetbald. Hij is nou niet meer te zien, hè? Ja, maar ik heb bij Ajax gespeeld. Ja. Echt, het eerste jaar bij Ajax was fantastisch, joh. Ik had alles, weet je wel. Ik had de pakken aan, kleding, schoenen. En dat was heel cool ook. Ik liep op school ook zo van, hey, ik speel bij Ajax. Hè? Je mag me aanraken. Weet je wel, vet stoer liep ik daar rond en zo. Maar het tweede jaar was een beetje een moeilijk jaar. Net als de coronaperiode ook. Want ik speelde gewoon geen minuut. Helemaal niks. En de trainer die zag het gewoon echt gewoon helemaal niet in mij zitten. Ik was nummer 17. En ja, een voetbalteam heeft 11 spelers die altijd in de basis staan. Dan heb je de wisselkeeper, dat is nummer 12. En dan heb je nog 4 wissels. En daarna kwam ik. Ja, mijn trainer wilde mij gewoon niet opstellen. Gewoon nooit. Ik trainde 8, 7 keer in de week. Ik werd gewoon nooit opgesteld. En soms speelde ik 5 minuten of 10 minuten of soms helemaal niet. En op een gegeven moment had ik geluk. Toen waren er 10 geblesseerde spelers. De trainer had geen keus. Hij moest mij wel opzetten. Ja, corona, ja, maar was wel iets, dacht ik. Ja, maar hij moest mij wel opstellen. En hij kwam naar mij toe op donderdag en hij zei tegen mij... Mo, aanstaande zondag sta jij in de basis tegen PSV Eindhoven B1. Succes. En ik, eindelijk in de basis. Yes, blij. En ik ging ook naar huis toe. Ik ging naar mijn vader toe. Ik zeg, papa, ik sta in de basis aanstaande zondag tegen PSV B1. Hij, mashallah, mashallah. Hele familie gaat komen kijken. Ik dacht, nou, zoveel druk hoef ik nou ook weer niet. Weet je wel. Maar mijn hele familie kwam kijken naar deze wedstrijd. En uitgerekend op die zondag speelt het eerste elftal van Ajax. Die speelt ook thuis. Thuis tegen PSV ook. Dus wat doen de fans? Weet je, we maken er een leuke dag van. We gaan 's morgens vroeg even kijken bij de jeugd. En daarna gaan we kijken naar de grote mannen. Bij onze wedstrijd waren er serieus 2000 toeschouwers. De gehele F-site, nog gekker dan vandaag, was daar. Met fakkels, trommels en alles, geluid en muziek. En wij komen op, joh, als gladiatoren. Echt zo, bam, bam. Ik vond het geweldig, joh. Een soort Champions League finale. Weet je wel, echt zo'n droom. Zo'n jongensdroom kwam uit. De wedstrijd begint. En wij komen binnen no time met 4-0 achter. Door mij. Ja, 4-0 achter, door mij. Ik ga even uitleggen. Mijn directe tegenstander, ik was zeg maar voorstopper. En voor de mensen die voetbaltermen die kennen, je hebt zeg maar de verdedigingslijn, dat is de laatste linie. En dan heb je een voorstopper. Ik was voorstopper, maar ik stopte niks die dag. Ik had een klein Marokkaans jongen tegenover mij. En die was zo snel, zo behendig, ik kon hem gewoon niet stoppen. Ik kon gewoon nergens naartoe. Gewoon. Hij scoorde gewoon 4 keer in de eerste helft. In de rust komt de coach naar mij toe, die zegt... Mo, ga jij maar lekker douchen. In de rust werd ik gewisseld. En als er iets echt vervelender is voor een voetballer, is dat het wel. Ik werd gewisseld en ik zat daar zo en ik denk, ja, ik kan wel gaan douchen En dan moet ik naar buiten. En dan staat mijn vader daar. Die staat op me te wachten. En die geeft me vast en zeker een pak slaag. En daarna staat de F-site. Die geeft me daarna ook nog een pak slaag. Natuurlijk. Ik denk, ja, ik kan niet zomaar naar buiten gaan. Ik denk, weet je, ik ga even naar de wc om even wat water te drinken. En ik kijk mezelf aan in de spiegel. En ik begin gewoon keihard te lachen. Maar echt ook schaterend te lachen. Echt gewoon. En de coach, hey, wat doe je nou, Mo? Dit is de beste jeugdopleiding van de wereld. En dan zit jij daar gewoon te lachen? Ik zeg, ja, coach. Ik ben er net achter gekomen dat ik nooit een profvoetballer ga worden. Weet je, hier ben ik misschien niet goed in. Maar wel in iets anders. En wat dat is, dat weet ik niet. Maar dat ga ik uitzoeken. En ik ben dat gaan uitzoeken. Ik ben over de hele wereld geweest. Allerlei verschillende banen gehad. En uiteindelijk ben ik terechtgekomen in Sydney, Australië. Daar was ik voetbalcoach, jeugdcoach. Omdat mijn oudste broer daar voetbalde ook. En daar zat ik weer in een moment van... Ja, misschien hebben jullie dat ook. Dat je dan denkt van... Ja, volgens mij heb ik veel meer in het leven wat ik kan doen dan dat ik nu doe. Dit is te makkelijk. En ik dacht, ja, waar ben ik eigenlijk goed in? En dan moet je dat gaan vragen, weet je wel, aan iemand om je heen. Maar je bent bang om gekwetst te worden natuurlijk. En ik dacht, weet je, ik ga het vragen aan de meest eerlijkste personen van de wereld. 2 5-jarige jochies. De kinderen zijn altijd eerlijk, hè. Dus ik had 2 5-jarige jochies om me heen. En ik vroeg aan hun van, why? Why do you come to my training sessions? En deze 2 5-jarige jochies, die kwamen elke dag 3 kwartier naar mijn huis toe gereden. Hè? Of in ieder geval naar mijn trainingsveld. Ze konden ook om de hoek getraind worden door een andere coach of iets dergelijks. Nee, maar ze wilden per se door mij gecoacht worden. En ik vroeg aan hun, why? Why do you come to my training sessions? 2 5-jarige jochies, ze kijken elkaar aan, ze lachen, ze kijken omhoog. Ze zeggen beide in koor, Coach Mo, you tell great stories. Ja, jullie klappen. Ik voelde me kut. Ik voelde me kloten. Want ja, ik heb bij Ajax gevoetbald. Hè? De beste jeugdopleiding van de wereld. Ik heb een KNVB-diploma. Ik ben een soort Johan Cruijff daar. Een zwarte Johan Cruijff misschien. Maar weet je wel, toch een soort van Johan Cruijff. En zij komen alleen voor mijn verhaaltjes. En dat was voor mij gewoon heel bijzonder. En ik ben daarmee aan de gang gegaan om te kijken hoe ik met mijn verhaal, mijn levensverhaal, iets kon doen. En op het podium kon gaan. En 3 jaar geleden stond ik op het podium bij Afrikadag. Aan de andere kant was dat, een andere grote zaal. En toen mocht ik op het podium komen, had Arjen me geboekt. En ja, ik was al trots dat ik überhaupt iets mocht doen. En toen had ik eigenlijk aan het begin van mijn set, zei ik steeds... ik zou graag na afloop een staande ovatie willen. En dat is niet zozeer omdat ik dan heel goed ben of zo, maar dan kunnen we gewoon net alsof doen. En dan maak ik een foto voor mijn moeder, weet je wel. En dan denkt mijn moeder, wow, staande ovatie, weet je wel. Nou, en we hebben die foto gemaakt 3 jaar geleden. En sinds de dag van vandaag, ik werp daar de vruchten van, wil je niet weten. Overal waar ik kom, zegt, heb jij een staande ovatie gekregen bij Afrikadag? Krijgt bijna niemand, joh. Ik zeg, ja, ik wel, man. Ik wel. Dus ik wil graag met jullie iets anders proberen. Want dus als laatste onderdeel van mijn set wil ik jullie iets vragen. Het is wel best controversieel. Maar afgelopen tijd zijn heel veel mensen gecanceld. En je bent pas een echte BN'er als je gecanceld wordt. En ik wil graag gecanceld worden. En ik wil jullie vragen om mij te helpen om gecanceld te worden. En ik heb een grap, maar hij is gewoon goed hoor. Maak je niet druk, hij is gewoon goed. Maar als jullie allemaal mij gaan filmen en dan jullie allemaal dan op Instagram zetten, op Facebook van Mo moet gecanceld worden, dit is niet goed. Weet je wel, en dan word ik vet beroemd. En ik hoop dat jullie dan met mij mee kunnen. Ja, dus wil iedereen even je mobieltje even pakken? Ja, serieus, ik vraag dit echt serieus. Even je mobiel pakken. Even, je mag filmen, want ik ga de grap vertellen en dan mag jullie dan gaan filmen en dan ook gewoon geschokt reageren. Geschokt reageren, je mocht boeien en zo, weet je wel. En, ja, oké, 5 mensen die hun telefoon uitsteken, goed. Ja, oké, ja, die kant ook eventjes, ja, even meehelpen. Ja, het is best wel een goede grap eigenlijk op zich, dus... Yes? Ik zeg 3, 2, 1 en dan gaan we, hè. Go, hè. En ik zie sommige mensen die denken, ja, ik ga hem afmaken. Ik heb teksten, jongen, wil niet weten. Komt goed. Ja, ik ga het goed. Jij, iedereen klaar met de mobieltjes daar? Oké, goed. Dit is de cancel Mo, hè. Dit is voor canceling Mo. Oké. Leuk dat jullie allemaal zijn. Welkom. Ja, ik moet toch even iets van mijn hart. Ja, de afgelopen tijd zijn een aantal mensen gecanceld. Maar ik steun toch 1 iemand in het bijzonder. Ali B. Ja, ik steun Ali B. Ja, ik kan dat, Ja. Sorry. Ja. Ik zou je ook zeggen waarom ik hem eigenlijk nog steun. Sinds dat hele gebeuren is gebeurd met Ali B, heb ik 40% van zijn opdrachten gehad. En dus ik ben tegen grensoverschrijdend gedrag, maar mijn bankrekening vindt het heel mooi. Ja. Oh, die stilte in de zaal. Oh, jullie willen me cancelen nu? Is dat het? En zien. Ja, stop met filmen. Ja. Allemaal posten vanavond, wordt echt geweldig. Je hebt gewoon morgen, comedian gecanceld bij Afrikadag. Oh, wat geweldig. Ik wil jullie echt een hele fijne dag nog toewensen en bedankt dat jullie er waren. Mijn naam was Mo Hersie. Ik ben straks nog even terug om een wrap-up te doen van de dag. Een samenvattend stukje. Dat zal intellectueel wel hoog zijn. Dus ik wil jullie vragen om nog te blijven tot het einde. Dank jullie wel alvast.
Okay, dames en heren, ladies and gentlemen, now we turn into English. So the rest of the program will be in English. My name is Arjen Bergvens. I'm director of the FMS, Foundation Max van der Stoel. I'm really happy that you are here. We have a great program for you with different speakers, and I'm going to introduce the first speaker to you. It's Uwe Opteneugel. Uwe, please take the floor. Uwe is Vice President of the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, one of our biggest partners and also sponsor of the Africa Day. Uwe and I know each other for many, many years. So Uwe, take the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Arjen. I think it's pretty risky to put people up here just to speak after this music and the cabaret, but I'll try my best. I think the Africa Day, which is is organized in partnership between the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, which I represent here. The Africa Day has turned into a dialogue forum, I think, over the years between about Africa and with Africa. And I think it shows to some extent that it is really not the way to leave relations between people just to governments, but you have to discuss it among citizens and among activists, and that's precisely what you do here, I think, in the Africa Day. When I look at the title this year, Conversations of a Changing Continent, then I think the only constant we're living in is change, actually. And regrettably, maybe, change is coming always and ever quicker, so that we have a hard time to grasp with it sometimes. And in this regard, I think that the situation we're in Europe with the war in Ukraine carries a little bit the temptation to enter in another Eurocentric phase of thinking. Because the war is in Europe for the first time in decades, and it is about Europe to a large extent. So I think if we would do this, another Eurocentric episode or period, it would be a grave, grave error. Because I think the war shows that it already, without us knowing how it will end, it shows that there will be plenty of global effects on the economy, on energy, on climate, on production, on the finance sector and everything. So I think we have all reason to keep up a straight dialogue and an intensive dialogue with our neighbor continent, Africa. The problem there might be that the Africans are used to Eurocentric Europeans, which doesn't have any future apart from having competitors in Africa, Chinese and other actors, Russia also, perhaps a little bit more in the old times when we had a bloc conflict. I think Europe really has all reason to dialogue with Africa about a joint future. And the topics which we should dialogue about are, I think, all present in this Africa Day, with 30-something workshops. So Arjen, I can only congratulate you to the organization. I had the impression that you had a lot of fun, not only with the music and the cabaret, but when I was in the historical building. I mean, this institute itself carries a lot of the controversial legacy of the relationship between Africa and the European continents. So I wish you more, and I wish us more Africa Days of that kind, and I wish you a good afternoon and a good end of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Uwe. We have to change this setting a little bit, but first I think I would like to tell you what the program of this, the following program will be. First of all, we will have a speech by Bert Koenders, the president of the FMS, but not only president of the FMS, he's a lot more than that. He used to be Minister of Foreign Affairs. And after him will speak Charity Kaluki Ngilu from Kenya. She will speak after Bert. Then we will have a panel with different speakers that I will introduce to you later on. And we will wrap up with Mo Hershey again. So we are now waiting for the speakers. Ja. Oké, nu nog 10. We moeten dat doen. Het spreekgestoelte. Het spreekgestoelte.
Wie weet waar het spreekgestoelte is?
Oké.
Hier.
Dat is niet handig. Wacht. Dit het? Nee. Dit is hem. Hij zit in elkaar volgens mij.
Ah.
Okay, this is not part of the comedy. It looks a little bit like that, but you know, this is all part of having a great conference with many different venues in which you have to change all of the time. But we are all set now. So I would like to introduce to you Bert Koenders, president of the FMS. Please, Bart, take the floor.
Perfect, guys. It's also a little bit part of the comedy, and I hope I'm not going to be cancelled too quickly. Dear friends, first of all, thank you very much. What an enormous pleasure that we can do this again, this day today, the Africa Day. It were 2 years that we were unable to organize anything because of COVID. So most of us were sitting on webinars and were speaking to each other on a distance. A bit alienating, I think. And I was just talking to the guest I'm going to introduce in a second, my great friend Charity Ngulu. And also in Kenya, I hear there were such lockdowns that there was a complete alienation of people who wanted to have a real conversation on Africa in their own countries, but only in their own circumstances. It's a great tradition that we have already for 25 years. And traditions are sometimes good to keep. Even more so as they continue, adopt, and I hope inspire. And the African continent, in all its variety, in its complexity, with its enormous change, stands today in the spotlight of all of us. And it should. And fortunately, all our guests are back. We've seen the musicians, the fashion designers, the visitors, the ambassadors, the diaspora. Is this better in the light? Oh, I would love to stand in the light. Now I can read actually what I'm going to say. See, we're not used to this anymore. We're normally having webinars and stuff like that, but I'm with you here. And what we're trying to do today is co-create Africa Day. So it's very different from 25 years ago, and it's better because we see whole new generations coming to us. And this day, I think, embodies, if you wish, symbolizes our work on democracy, equity, and dialogue. And I was particularly inspired. I walked a bit around to the different seminars on the discussions today. What we really try to do in the FMS is not only to analyze, to think through, to cooperate, to co-create, but also to come with practical examples and with practical actions. And I come back to that in a second. And from discussing a more equitable relationship on climate action, where we'll talk about with the group in a minute, we will also come up again after this day with very specific ideas on climate justice, on tax policy, on coherence, on asset recovery, on foreign policy, and what have you. And what struck me today was also when I went to a meeting where there was a lot of the diaspora, and they raised their voice and they said, it is time that we Africans take the lead in charting our future. I think that is at the heart of the work we're doing FMS, and I wanted to thank everybody in the diaspora. An applause for the diaspora. Where are they? You know, we want to have to provide for you here the conversation, to be inspired by you. You come up with new ideas and you come in the leadership to work on the future of the relationship between the Netherlands, Europe, and Africa. I think it's also for us as FMS important to also defend our own values, our own democracy, our own positioning in the world. And I have to say that I'm a bit worried about that. As you know, we are becoming slightly more inward-looking. And I stand for the tradition of Max van der Stoel, for charity and others from Africa. He was a foreign minister in the Netherlands who stood up for human rights also when it was difficult in Europe and elsewhere. And this foundation is named actually after him. And I don't think it's a luxury at all to talk about human rights and development in a time of democratic recession, autocracy, big man politics, parts of our world where any respect for human rights, international humanitarian law, and basic socio-economic rights are quickly disappearing. Today is not for me to give a long speech about Africa, although many of you know I would love to do that. Our main speakers today are from Africa, and they are our guests. And let me just say that if we want to embark on this more equitable, global, if you wish, decolonized conversation on Africa, and distill a program of action on it, then we should start also with the urgencies. It's not just a theoretical or nice afternoon here in Amsterdam. I think, first of all, we will have to focus on a much more equitable partnership. And let us make no mistake, let us make no big mistake. At the moment, Africa is a continent which is part of a much wider world in which we see conflict, disarray. At the moment that, as we spoke about it this afternoon, Africa is trying to unify itself with unity in the next decade. A world where might seems to be right, of geopolitical and geo-economic rivalry, of clashes of interests, not only in Europe but also in Africa, where China, Russia, Turkey, the Gulf, Europe, the US are forming a complex geo-economic and geopolitical picture, where people are absolutely second. They become more the object of that game than the subject of their own future. And where all our relationships these days seem to be weaponized, and where Africa grabs chances, but also expresses enormous vulnerability. I think what we saw today is, with the little glimpses of discussion we have back as a cooperative conversation, is a continent which is characterized by massive change, entrepreneurship, modernization, where a new young generation who stood up, for instance, in Sudan to President Bashir, and are further cornered now every day by his successor, the Special Forces of Hamiti, and that young group, which really stands up for a new way of work creation and development and dialogue, is actually being suppressed. I think it's also the continent which reflects the global phenomenon of rising inequality, democratic recession, and even coups d'etats, which I've seen in my beloved Sahel, where we see sort of a rise of coups d'etats in the countries of West Africa. And they have a reason. Because most of the people, if you talk to the people in Africa, there's a sense of fed-upness. Fed-upness, I think, is the right word. Criticizing their own governments, as some of us do criticize our governments here. By the way, it's not that different, Charity. But where we see a combination of ugly governance, extremism, climate change, massive inequality, and that sense of fed-upness leads to a lot of new energy, but that new energy will have to be channeled. And I think all over the world we find at the moment that this mixed picture, where there is on the one hand this positive trend of a new generation of trying to find new initiatives, new startups, jobs, human security. And at the same time, in that big battle, we see already that many African governments and governments here are failing the youth that are actually drowning in the Mediterranean. An enormous brain drain from Africa, and at the same time a big difference who you are when you come in Lampedusa or on the eastern border. That is what we call these days in the Netherlands institutionalized racism. Now my question here today is, where is actually the African agenda of our own government, of Europe? I know this has been discussed this afternoon, and of course I'm sure that good ideas came out of it. But where is actually the urgency, actually? Do we have here in Amsterdam, in The Hague, a willingness to engage? Or do we still see Africa as one whole, an object, and only a risk, rather than an opportunity for new cooperation? I think here, to be very honest, I hear the silence of the deaf. The Netherlands has a rich history of international cooperation, also a rich history, by the way, of imperialism and colonialism. But I think what we have to try to do now is to think through what that engagement could be in a different time. And one thing would be a big mistake, just to wait for some new big narrative. I think we're trying to find that in this cooperation. We're living in a completely different world than 25 years ago. Africa is a geopolitical and geostrategic continent on its own. The Africa paper that is going to be written by the new government should not be something of the development ministry. It should be something of the cabinet as a whole. And if we really think that that's the case, let's not only wait for the voices and the equal partnership, because that won't come from itself, but also the enormous urgency. Let me just, and I'll end by that, because otherwise I am talking too much. Let's just look at the reality of today. We're living in a time of, first of all, post-COVID. And that's why I'm so honored that Charity wanted to come from Kenya. She's the former Minister of Health. She was telling me how important it was that these vaccinations came. But at the same time, we know that actually the biggest economic consequences of the COVID crisis are at the moment in Africa. Why? Simply because there's a higher debt level. They don't have the counter-cyclical funds that we have to finance the unemployed for a certain period of time. But I don't see really the action that comes normally after that, which is a common interest. And for all those who are from a more technical point of view, why not more SDR allocations to Africa? Why not invest massively? If I look to the figures, honestly, and here I'm a bit more political, 500 million for root causes of migration and climate change, that's not going to make the difference. If we massively invest, we invest in public goods that are all for our future. And I know so many companies and individuals and NGOs who can see that here is a possibility to do. So the COVID crisis is first priority number one. Nobody can wait for that. It needs the finance right now. It needs the decisions in Europe, IMF, World Bank, and so on and so forth. The second, obviously, is the whole discussion around the Ukraine war. I really won't get into this now from the deeper point of view. But this is a global crisis, not only about the European security order. We see African nations. Kenya is actually representing the point of view in the United Nations that the aggression of Russia and the trampling of human rights and the taking away the Charter of the UN is a new type of colonization. But lots of people are now actually questioning why we have all this attention right now when it wasn't there at earlier crises in Africa and in Syria and elsewhere. Well, let's at least take the consequences of this. And we realize at the moment, I think all of us, that with rising food prices up to 40% and rising energy prices up to 50%, we're ready for an enormous economic dip at the moment in most parts of East and West Africa. So this is not traditional development cooperation. Here there is a common interest, as we do within Europe, for an investment and a situation in which we see that now food aid and humanitarian aid is actually the old agenda that now comes back, as if we're back into the old times of just giving out humanitarian aid. So urgency is there. If we talk about the new relationship with Africa, more equitable, a real conversation about what it means. We're not anymore there in the 50s or 60s or in 2000 or 2010. All the conflicts that we have geopolitically, conflicts in countries, polarization, you find all over the world in different degrees and in different ways. Then let's not forget, when we chart this new route, in which we figure out with all the people that are around here, that is a way that requires urgency right now. It's not an urgency that comes up with all kind of nice stories for a future relationship, which you normally see in the packages and policy papers of our governments. And it requires, I think, to look at Africa at its diversity and to put maybe two things, and it's really my ending in the, central in the Africa initiatives from our own government. First, and we'll discuss that in a second, climate justice. If we want a green economy with jobs, with private enterprises, with NGOs, of a real greening of the world, Africa has to be playing a central part. The economic cooperation in solar energy and in other energies can be massive. But let's not forget that if you look to the top 1% of the world population, who is responsible for the same amount of CO2 levels as 50% of the poorest in the world. That is simply unjust, and therefore the promises made in Glasgow will have to be fed up. I didn't see that in the government plan, so let's really try to do that. And second, last point, coherence. I hate the word coherence. When I was minister, we constantly mentioned it. But listen, it was very interesting for me to see, if you talk about trade, the old-fashioned, real big economic issues, because that's what we're talking about as well, not only the political and cultural ones, although they are very crucial. The real point now is, what do we do with our trade policies, with our tax policies, and if we can get the oligarchs very quickly sanctioned, why did we never do that to some of the people in the Eastern Congo or those who were taking part in the management of raw materials in a way that everybody knew that the money was stolen out of the country? Let's have also an initiative on that. It's not only in Russia. Ladies and gentlemen, there is so much more to say about this, but I just wanted to end with mentioning two heroes that inspired me today. And one is not expecting it, and the other is expecting it, I hope. The one who is not expecting it is somebody who has actually created these days the idea of looking at a continent not only as an object, but as a subject, as a sort of a more equal conversation, as one where you come up with ideas, but also with practical tools and solutions. As somebody who has a lot of leadership in creating this, and I heard is maybe leaving us. And that is Arjen Bergvens. Arjen, stand up here. That's good to hear. See, Arjen is getting nervous now because, first of all, he doesn't like this, but secondly, he thinks it's a goodbye. It's not. I mean, we're going to give you a special goodbye once you leave at the end of the year.
Thank you.
But this guy has done all this for the last 20 years. It's his last Africa Day as director of the Foundation Max van der Stoel, and we have for him roses. Goed jongen, top. That's only it, but we'll...
Okay.
You deserve it. Great man.
Thank you.
So Arjen will be back, he's still with us, and we're giving a big official goodbye at some point. The second hero is coming all the way from Kenya. And I'm extremely honored and pleased that she's willing to come. She's a very good friend of mine for years. We worked together when I was Minister for Development and Foreign Affairs. We worked together on some international initiatives, especially in the beginning of the century, to make the World Bank and the IMF and the big institutions more accountable, more poverty-focused, more in terms of the reality of the grounds of Europe and Africa. She was a minister of health, not unimportant, I would say. She was that before COVID, But of course, she has a lot of lessons learned there. And she is at the moment a governor. As you know, in Kenya, they have decentralized the system. I think there are more women governors in Kenya than we have commissarissen van de koning in the Netherlands. You don't know what it is, but they have less power than you, by the way. I'm not saying let's keep it that way, because that's not my goal of my discussion today. But I'm very pleased that you are here. She is in the middle also, frankly, of campaigns in Kenya. Kenya is again this year having presidential elections, which will be absolutely key for the country. She's closely involved in this, but she nevertheless took the opportunity for 2 days to come to Amsterdam. Charity, please. Oh, okay.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Bart Kudas, for that introduction, and also the president of the foundation, Max van der Stoel, the organizing committee, and continuously Mr. Jan, for always inviting me and talking to me, and the distinguished guest meeting here this afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me indeed to be in this meeting this afternoon during this year's Africa Day to share my thoughts on global inequalities and the consequences of climate change and COVID-19. I want to begin by giving a quote from Nelson Mandela, and he said, "As long as poverty, injustice, and gross inequality persist in our world, none of us can truly rest." And that's what I was saying to Bert Kodas, that we have not rested. He said to me, "When are you going to retire from politics?" And I said, as long as these injustices persist, we must be at it until we free African continent and make sure that African continent will get the best that it should get and really truly begin to grow. The above quote by one of the greatest leaders of our time captures the constant struggle we find ourselves in to address the inequalities in our societies. These inequalities are spread across socioeconomic, security, and human rights at local, national, and regional and global levels, and continue to undermine the physical and mental well-being of citizens across the world. These inequalities have the commonality of the creation of mankind in our search and the maintenance of differing societal and cultural norms. It is in this environment that the first global pandemic in 100 years, COVID-19, found fertile ground in which the inequalities between individuals at local levels, and those of states at a global level found fertile ground and further widened the gap of inequality in our societies. The 2013 study by Max Rosa, titled "Global Inequality of Opportunity," found that infant mortality stands at 12.7% in Somalia, in comparison to Iceland, that reports at 0.21% infant mortality rate. The average life expectancy in Sierra Leone is 52 years, while in Japan it stands at 84 years. A child in southern Sudan will spend less than 5 years schooling, while a child in Australia will spend 22.9 years schooling. Income inequality stands at $661 per capita per year in Central African Republic, while in Qatar, it is $116,963 per capita per year. As I am sure most of us in this room are aware, that reason for forums such as this one we sit in is the glaring inequalities Africa as a continent has and continues to face. The inequalities in health, wealth, education, and social-political dimensions totally undermine Africa's potential to provide its people with basic services. Some of the causes of global inequalities include unstable political environments, exploitation of poor countries, lack of education, lack of innovation, wars, and natural disasters. These inequalities are evident in agricultural production, trade imbalance, technology uptake, research, science, labor relations, finance, and market access. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is a clear case of how war increases global inequalities. We are already feeling it in Kenya with very high prices of fuel and food prices. According to the March 2022 IMF and World Bank Economic Outlook, the war in Ukraine is already disrupting the world supply chain. Steeper price increases for food and fuel may spur a greater risk of unrest in some regions. From sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America to the Caucasus of Central Africa, while food insecurity is likely to further increase in parts of Africa and the Middle East. The conflict disrupted Ukraine's planting and harvest season, destroyed critical fields, stores, infrastructure, and production, especially in eastern Ukraine. Moreover, the conflict has resulted in shipping being halted from Black Sea, from where about 90% of Ukrainians' grain are exported. With respect to the Middle East and North Africa, it had stated that rising prices may lead to social tensions, especially in countries with weaker social safety nets. Fewer job opportunities, limited physical space, and unpopular governments. This extends to Egypt, which imports about 80% of its wheat from Russia and Ukraine. Africa is made up of countries that are predominantly producers of raw materials and unprocessed foods, while the more developed nations, due to their advanced technologies, access to finance and credit, are engaged in value addition and the materials and act as resellers and consumers of the final product. There are various reasons for this inequality of nations in the value chain. First, we must remember Africa is comprised of 54 nation states as recognized by the United Nations, and a few others that are disputed territories. The majority of these attained their political and economic independence from colonial reigns as early as 60 years ago. Most of these countries are yet to move out of the economic starting blocks to address the economic challenges facing them. Second, due to the relative novelty of democracy in Africa, political instability and instances of long-drawn leadership have stifled the capacity for vibrant and innovative ideas and concepts that would likely have improved Africans' capacity to develop at par with other continents. Tellingly, 60 years ago, at attaining independence, most of these countries were economically at par with the Southeast Asian countries like South Korea, Singapore, Malaysia, and Taiwan. China was still an agrarian economy that could not be considered a third world economy. Today, these Southeast Asia countries were among the top strongest economies in the world. The reason? Visionary, focused, and a committed leadership. The rampant cases of poor leadership have made most African countries remain economically vulnerable and are now dependent on loans as well as grants from these Southeast Asia economic tigers. Because of poor leadership from Africa, decisions, Africa has become captured in a cycle of expensive loans, especially from China. And this is very unfortunate that it is happening to us once again. These loans, mostly for infrastructure projects, come as engineering production contracts, packages with conditions that undermine key economic sectors like manufacturing, technology, transfer, and job creation. These loans are increasing the inequalities in most African countries, since most materials and equipment, services, and top-earning jobs come from China. African countries provide land, semi-skilled labor, basic trade, and expensive loan repayments. There is a direct connection between poor leadership and high inequality gap witnessed in most of the countries. Somalia, Burkina Faso, Uganda, Sierra Leone, and Zimbabwe in the recent past have common thread of very poor leadership that is inversely proportional to the levels of inequality witnessed in Max Rosa's study. Because of the poor leadership, these countries experience uncontrolled misuse of resources, rampant corruption, and other wasteful programs that deny citizens basic services. The results being high levels of poverty, lack of access to basic needs, social tension, leading to conflicts and civil wars in our African continent. These countries and Africa in general spend a huge percentage of its income on security services and the military equipment to stem the consistent internal conflicts. More often, these conflicts are over basic needs such as water, pasture, and distribution of resources. Instead of governments putting more resources to provide these basic needs, they would prefer to buy more arms, more guns, and recruit more officers to deal with insecurity. In other words, they rather deal with the symptoms of the problems that we are having than deal with the causes. Unfortunately, the poor leadership in Africa is encouraged and sometimes propped by the West, with elections in our countries being highly contentious and heavily contested. Election observers, and especially from European Union and the West, more often than not, issue reports of voting that is free and fair and generally representing the will of the people. When pressed, most developed countries will feign an interference, stating, "We cannot dictate how people vote," even when you know the elections have not been free and fair. Then you leave it to us to fight ourselves and to kill each other. The West makes military aid readily available to most brutalized countries with the highest number of vulnerable communities. It is easier to get military aid than to get COVID-19 vaccines, ARVs, or malaria preventing nets. Military and aid rarely comes with good governance and anti-corruption conditions that are always attached to aid. Trade imbalance between the West and Africa is a major cause of global inequality. Trade barriers, restrictions against processed goods from Africa has continued to restrict market penetration for Africa goods and has contributed to the huge trade imbalances. The impact of trade imbalance has exacerbated poverty and the low incomes in African countries. Most African countries continue to import even the most basic products from the West, like foodstuffs, textiles, and furniture. Kenya imports very good cheese and milk from Netherlands. The impact of importing these goods has stagnated manufacturing in Africa, resulting into high unemployment, low standards of living, and civil strife. Therefore, due to this lack of opportunities, our people continue to migrate to Europe. Climate change and COVID-19 pandemic are two of the most defining challenges of the 21st century. The loss of life and economic meltdown were the most devastating in this 21st century. Climate change and COVID-19 have widened the inequality gap between countries in Africa and between Africa and the West. This has led to more African households shrinking into abject poverty and increased the illegal migration to the West. Thousands of young people and families are risking their lives crossing the Mediterranean Sea to come and seek better lives in the West. According to United Economic Development in Africa Report 2021, 37 million people in Africa fell into poverty as a result of COVID-19. The gender inequalities have also widened the gap. When pandemics such as COVID-19 hit, with women bearing the brunt, apart from being the caregivers in the family, women tend to practice more time trade and mostly perishable goods like fruits, vegetables, and grains. COVID-19 and its resultant closures hit such traders because of the unsold goods that were perishing, that were getting bad. Climate change, on its part, has continued to have adverse effects on the world ecosystem with the disruptions to production, especially in agriculture. Africa is experiencing extreme weather changes arising out of climate change. We are bearing the cost of industrial excesses of the West and China through pollution and the chemical uses. In recent times, Africa has seen extreme weather patterns with devastating impact on livelihoods, agricultural production, and economic activities. Flash floods, long dry spells, drying up of water sources, rising water levels, especially in our internal lakes, fragile infrastructure are some of the effects of climate change. 68% of the African population practice subsistence agriculture, that is rain-fed, uses rudimentary methods of farming and with no government support. The adverse effects of climate change, especially erratic rain patterns, spell doom for these farmers. This has resulted into hunger and famine, forcing many people into abject poverty. Due to the lack of sustainable jobs, most rural communities in Africa practice basic trade that is harmful to environment. This includes charcoal burning, cutting of trees, logging, and river sand harvesting that accelerate deforestation and flash floods. These practices further reduce the farmlands and affect food production. Climate change and COVID-19 have exacerbated the inequalities between Africa and the West. Deliberate and practical and time-bound interventions by both Africa and Western governments are required urgently to bridge the global inequalities and address the consequences of climate change and COVID-19. In 2018, African countries ratified the African Continental Free Trade Area, creating a vast job market of over 1.3 billion people and a potential GDP of 3 trillion US dollars. This is a huge opportunity for inter-Africa trade and industry. The market of 1.3 billion people can create employment for our people, especially the youth. However, African governments need to invest in technology and skills development among the youth to equip them with tools to be productive to serve this market. On its part, the West can participate and support African Continental Free Trade Area through establishment of factories and industries in Africa, as well as technology transfer. And this way the gap in the trade imbalance between Africa and Europe will be reduced. The intellectual property agreement envisaged in the African Continental Free Trade Area will enable Africa to reclaim its abundant brain power that it loses to the West. With this brain power and technology, Africa could begin to close the inequality gap, especially in research and production capacities for essential products like pharmaceuticals and non-pharmaceuticals and medicines. Although climate change, COVID-19 was a global phenomenon, most of the Western countries have bounced back with their transport, hospitality, and their economics sectors up and running. Africa, on the other hand, is yet to bounce back, especially in key economic sectors. This is due to very small skill set and fragile economic system that cannot withstand such devastating effects of COVID-19 and the climate change. COVID-19 pandemic, though devastating in its wake, we also exposed African economic resilience and the capacity to manufacture goods that can be tapped into through inter-Africa trade. During the lockdowns and travel restrictions, most African countries turned to local manufacturing for production of basic goods. It helps us a lot to realize that there is something we can do. This showed that African countries have capacity to manufacture for their own needs. Interventions such as the Global Gateway investment package by the European Union and African Union, developed in February 2022, presents a good platform for Africa and Europe to address some of these causes of global inequalities, especially between the two continents. For Global Gateway investment package and similar interventions to have an impact, it would be advisable for EU funds only to be channeled to those programs that have been identified and prioritized by the beneficiaries. The process should include timelines for delivery, required and expected impact that programs such as those will have on the communities. A lot of times, all these programs are done from the government level that does not sometimes appreciate and understand the needs of the people. This will stem the wastefulness of funds that has been witnessed in the past programs. And lastly, COVID-19 pandemic was a wake-up call for all of us, but more so for the poor countries especially, for lack of preparedness. There is need for each country to design early warning mechanisms and preparedness programs through skills development, technology transfers, and the building of food and health reserves that can help the people when something like this happens. I want to thank you for listening to me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Evan. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's move quickly. I would like to invite our panelists to the stage. And our panelists are Udo Bullman. He's a member of the European Parliament, coordinator for the group Socialists and Democrats Development Committee. Give him a big applause. Faten Agat, Senior Advisor, Climate Diplomacy and Geopolitics at the African Climate Foundation. Fatima Fali, Program Director of MACUA from South Africa. Mariam Aliyu, Women's Rights Activist from rural Nigeria. Give them a big applause. Udo, I would like to start with you. At the end of the speech, when Mrs. Engelou mentioned the EU, you were applauding. Why were you applauding?
For a very precise reason. The governor made a very important case. She was speaking about Global Gateway, one of the new measures of the European Union, one of the offers of the European Union. But you presented a very important condition. If you do these programs, ask the beneficiaries what they think about it. Create, and I translate it into my words, and I applaud it for that reason, create ownership. Do something where people really at the very end, in their regions, in their communities, in their families, have profit, have progress from that, and don't only go for foreign investment, nobody sees who takes the money and afterwards is leaving the country. This is a very essential point. I could be more on that, give more points on that. I echo very much what the Belgian development minister said the other day, Miriam Kittir, and this is our political program in the European Parliament. If I give €1, for instance, official development assistance, I would like to know, and I would like to give more money, but I would like to know how much of this €1 is making its way to the lower 40% of the population. And it's really reaching the people in need. And this is why we propose to the European Commission, why we propose also to the members of national government and the national agencies of Germany, of France, of the Netherlands, please help us properly to assess what we are doing. And the Commission has already reacted to it positively by introducing an inequality marker. So we would like to know if we are doing something like Global Europe, if we are doing something on health, if we are doing something on education, on small and medium-sized businesses, is it really for the lower 40%, or do we increase inequality? And SDG 10, the fight against inequality, is for me a strategic element for all the other policy dimensions, because only if we stop to suck out the energy of our communities by increasing inequalities, we can win the future and we can give a chance to the next generation.
Thank you very much, Udo. Faten, you said during the speech, please let me intervene on this issue. Please take the floor.
Thank you. Now, maybe I wanted to intervene on the coherence question, but I think it links a bit to this point that Udo just mentioned. I was, just before joining the African Climate Foundation, in fact, one of the lead advisors on the African side in the lead up to the summit of February. And one thing that I can say, and very confidently so, is that the proposal of the European Commission on the Global Gateway was not run by African countries, non-negotiators. And therefore, I would agree with Madam that if I think the EU is serious about this partnership of equals, it starts with respect in the design of the programs. It's not something that's parachuted a couple of weeks prior to a major summit, just to look good and just to speak of pretty much it's about a geopolitical positioning of the EU and not necessarily about a partnership of equals with Africa. But I wanted to respond actually to the comment of Minister Koenders on the coherence issue. And I wanted to highlight two questions, perhaps three. Coherence in rhetoric. And I wanted there to take us back, in fact, to the EU-Africa summit that took place in February. Well, just prior to the summit, as the African countries, negotiators, we were told there was a strong push, and I think considering not that on the African side there's resistance to it, but a huge push for a green transition. And one of the most contentious points was gas. Fast forward a few weeks, in fact, just after the summit, the Ukraine-Russia war started, and what we see now is, in fact, a rush towards African gas. And there's certain repercussions to that, and I think we need to be, from a coherence point of view, be very clear as to the potential consequences in terms of stranded assets, notably for African countries, in terms of indebtedness. And it has repercussions, and I'm happy to go back to it, because we see more on this, but very little still on renewable energies. Still 52% of renewable energy infrastructure investments in Africa are currently coming from China through concessional loans. And I think there it's a missed opportunity for Europe. The second one is a lack of coherence in policy. And I wanted to zoom there onto the famous carbon tax, the CBAM, that the EU is pushing for. And what we see there is that it's a policy that will, in the case, that was, its origin in terms of concept is noble. And I think it targeted perhaps other partners than Africa. But the consequences from the studies that we now have, the biggest losing region in the world will be Africa, and not just middle-income African countries, but low-middle-income countries. If I take a country such as Mozambique that will potentially lose 1% of its GDP as a direct result of the carbon tax that the EU will impose, I think it gives us food for thought. And the last one is international coherence in terms of international positioning. And I think if anything that the COVID crisis and the position of the EU and the WTO has taught us is that we can speak of aid, we can speak of help, but I would like us to speak of systemic changes. And I think there's certain and equal international rules where the EU has not particularly been forthcoming in supporting a shift there in the interest of an equal partnership with Africa.
Okay, thank you very much. Fatima, you are nodding really, really hard, so please take on.
I thought there's a really interesting point in terms of negotiations with Africa. So I'm in South Africa, and we work with mining communities. And often what happens in mining communities, there's some dialogue between mining companies and government, but no communications with the affected communities, right? Next thing you know, you're being relocated, or there's this big operation. And I find it quite surprising. I thought it was only a dirty business of mining that does that. But in fact, the EU does that as well. It's quite shocking, particularly that the EU and the West is seen as the bastion of democracy and development. That's something to think about. You know, I think a lot about the climate crisis. And when you talk about a transition, I mean, look, it's a reality. It's a reality that I think was largely driven by the West, but the global South has to pay for it, right? If we look at the history of fossil fuels, if you just look at South Africa, for example, just the level of gender-based violence attached to the coal industry is shocking, right? But no one cares about that. Now everyone is interested in you know, minerals that will be used in the renewable energy transition, manganese being one of them. So together with ActionAid and SOMO, we tried to zoom in on what the manganese mining sector in South Africa looks like, because South Africa has the largest deposits. So, you know, we expect that Europe will be knocking on our doors soon. Well, they're already there. And it's the same thing, right? So when you talk about renewable energy or you talk about moving away from fossil fuels. The reality is that a lot of South Africans, right, and women in South Africa living 5 kilometers from massive mining operations, transnational corporations, can't afford that electricity, right? Yet they have to pay for it. Now you want to talk about renewable energy, right? Again, is it going to be accessible to the communities that are directly impacted and pay for those extraction? I feel that there needs to be deeper levels of accountability. And I mean, this is my first Africa Day, so thank you for that. But it did feel a lot, if I can be a little critical, I worry that it's a talk shop, you know? And I think there's a very critical role to be played in terms of holding your governments accountable. We don't want charity, you know? We don't want charity in Africa. We want investment. We want investment, and we want equitable investment, but we want to determine the T's and C's, because we know the T's and C's that come with your loans and your investments, right? We continuously pay for it. We're in debt always. So when we talk about the development and, you know, Western democracy, I think we must, and I want to labor this point, it is bold on the exploitation of black women, black and brown women in the global South. And you're responsible for that, right? Often it becomes very abstract when you're far away from the reality. And I think Madam did an excellent job in terms of painting the realities in Africa. But, you know, you're part of government, and government, and I'll talk from South Africa's perspective, is corrupt, right? It is very corrupt. And, you know, you talk about the 40% investment. Let me tell you what happens with those investments. It builds facilities like in Nkandla, and I'm not sure if everyone knows what Nkandla is. It is a palace for our former very corrupt president, who is charged with alleged rape, because, you know, that's what taxpayers do, right? That's where a lot of humanitarian aid goes and is funneled through. So be more critical about the investments that you make, and make sure that it is reaching, because good intentions often lead to a lot of problems, right? So I do urge civil society here to hold your governments more accountable. I think that rhetoric is good, but it's action on the ground, and COVID was a big reality check for a lot of us. Beyond our government's really poor response in stay home and wash your hands in a country that there's no access to basic services, staying home with partners that, you know, abuse you on a daily basis is not very good advice. We took it from the West, and we're like, we're going to implement it here in South Africa. It didn't work. GBV soared. If we talk about the injustice around the vaccines, it took Africa a very long time to get access to the vaccines. Why? Because who was stockpiling it? Whose lives mattered more? That's what it comes down to, right? And it's white lives. Brown and black people, we expendable. And those are realities that you need to tackle with, and it's not nice, right? So I really do hope that you hold your governments more accountable, that you have a lot more critical conversations and take in, you know, I used one example in my session and then I'm done. In South Africa, you know, we still don't have access to water. At least most South Africans don't have potable water. And literally, people still shit, and I'm going to be that gross, shit in holes. In fact, a lot of our schools in the very rural areas have pit latrines. There were 2 cases where little children died in those pit latrines. They fell in and died in shit, right? We are all accountable for that. So I think the climate crisis offers us an opportunity to change this very unbalanced system that we have, right? And so when you talk about equitable investments, right, and you talk about equitable development, let the citizens, let the people on the ground determine what the T's and C's of those conditions are, because ultimately we pay for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mariam, you asked me in the before we entered this room, you asked me, can I be critical? So, as a women's rights activist from Nigeria, please, what's your take on this?
Okay, first of all, thank you so much. And thank you, Madam Governor, for the wonderful speech. It's as if you were taking all the pains and all the words out of my mouth. See, in Africa, we have a problem. And yeah, most of our problems usually caused by people who seemingly make it look as if they are there to support us. It's more like you're giving us sweets and then you're taking sweets from us and then you're giving us breadcrumbs in return. So that is actually my perspective to some certain extent. Like Fatima clearly stated earlier, she said, give us investment. You know, train our young people, our youth, how to use technologies. There are a lot of technological advancements in Europe. Give us this particular, ideology. Change, be innovative. Try to show us different ways. So not the other way around. Like, for instance, recently we had a political issue in Nigeria. Sorry, I'm from Nigeria, and I'll talk more about Nigeria and what we are seeing there, in which youths were massacred because they were protesting against bad governance and all that. And then some of these particular youth tried to reach out to the West, right? But then they were like sent back to the government. So nobody really takes us seriously. When we come to the West, it's as if we have been sent back to the same people who are killing us. We have a lot of problems in Nigeria. Especially part of the problem is their lack of women participation in politics. They don't give youth the voices for us to be able to come out to speak. We cannot even stand. Like, for me, I'm considered a notorious activist and feminist, someone who is there to ridicule, cause problems for the government. But then all I want is just for a change. I want to have a voice. I want to be able to stand, on a podium in Nigeria, free to talk about the issues that I'm having, right? I want to be able to talk about the problems that the youth are going through, because I'm also a youth. I'm 27 years old, and there are still I'm told that because I'm 27 years old, I cannot hold some positions in terms of politics. Why? I don't think that law should stand. I don't think the West, should, because I have written a lot of times, for some of the policies, for it to be reviewed. I have been part of some advocacies. Like in Nigeria, there are some laws in which if you try to work with the West to do it, if the government prevents that particular law, like for instance, the gender equality bill, it didn't even get to the second hearing, not to talk of the third hearing in the parliament, it was just sent out. We reached out to the West for them to support, but then we're sent back to the same perpetrators who are causing us these same problems. We talk about Africa being corrupt, but who is giving them the upper hand for this corruption is the West. When you go to the West, you see a lot of things are happening here in the West, in which, and I'm like, I'm from Africa, but then I'm talking about Africa being extremely corrupt, but I see a whole lot of corruption here as well. If you want to clean up your homes, if you want to clean up other places, like you want to clean up Africa, you want to support Africa, but I think it also starts from here as well, because even in Europe here, there are so many injustices. Like, for instance, talking about the Curaçao people, I'm going to talk about the Netherlands. I'm sorry, I told you earlier. I'm going to go straight. The Curaçao, as well as the, what's the other one? Suriname. Can you see the serious inequality between, the Dutch? They are also Dutch, but they are black Dutch. But then you can actually clearly see the inequality between these particular, some of them are referred to as colonies, right? But why? Why do we have to have all this? This is the 21st century, for God's sake. We still pass through some sort of institutionalized racism, low-key racism. Oh, you smile at me, but at the end of the day, at the other side, it's just, oh, she's black, she can't do that. Who told you I can't do that? Did you give me the room and I'm not representing? So we don't create space for people to be able to come out and make things happen, but then we blame them when those things don't happen. You don't give me the room. How do you expect me to do that? So this is where we come from. This is where we talk. This is where I am coming from. This is my point. I want to have a voice. I don't want you to look at my color. I want you to see what I'm capable of giving. Like when I stand and I talk, you listen to what I say. You don't listen to the color of my, listen to the color of my skin. I don't know how to say it. So I want to be able to make some sort of changes. And I also want to be able to for the West to help us, genuinely help us to make changes in our country. Our government is corrupt. Like, we cannot, this vote does not count in Nigeria. Women are consistently being abused. Okay, now do you know that in the parliament, we are supposed to have over 500 seats, but 400 plus seats belong to the men, and we have only 20 for the women. And then, of course, we don't have enough women in parliament, so who exactly do we want to accept our gender equality bill? Seeing that the gender equality bill creates more room for women participation, it creates more room for issues of GBV to be sorted out. Like, for instance, children between the ages of 18 to 15 are being forced into marriages. In northern Nigeria, we have terrorists, we have banditry. We are consistently being attacked, but the government are doing nothing about it. We keep getting aid from the West. We need you to send military there to pump them out. We need more help. Women are consistently being raped. All forms of gender-based violence in the northern part of Nigeria. We have banditry. Have you heard of banditry before? Kidnapping. Like, you cannot drive from Kaduna to Abuja. You will get kidnapped on the way. Kaduna to Abuja is just 2 hours. Imagine the hostility. Imagine what we go through there. So most times when I talk, people tell me I talk because I'm angry. I'm always angry. Who wouldn't be? Do you see what I see consistently? Do you see what I see every day? The children being forced to get married to men who are supposed to be their ancestors. Like men who naturally just stay, and then at the end of the day, they end up with vaginal fistula. And they don't have anybody to treat them because they did this particular thing because of poverty. Food, zero. Healthcare is zero. We're talking about COVID-19 vaccine. In some part of Nigeria, the vaccine is still not there. Right now, we don't. And now, during COVID-19, we are forced to close down everything, to close down shops. Women are now being locked up in the same houses with their abusers. Domestic violence, intimate partner violence. Within COVID-19, my organization treated 225 cases of domestic violence, in which we lost 3 of the women. So this is consistently what we go through. And then you write to the government, and all you get are just threats of, oh, you are always talking. You always have. Why wouldn't I talk? If I don't talk, no change is going to happen. And then some people who are supposed to be there to support you, to ensure that these particular changes are effected, are only there because they want their names and their logos to be on the banner to say, oh, EU did this. International community did this. But what changes are you bringing to the northern part of Nigeria? We have atheists, we have LGBTQIA issues. Like, these people are consistently, attacked, beaten up, and killed in northern part of Nigeria. Another part of Nigeria, but the north is the worst. That's where most of the issues are. Okay. But nobody is talking about this. 1 minute. Please, we are trying as much as we can. I want to be a voice for other youths in Nigeria. Take me as somebody that is here representing my country, seeking for us to change our perspective about Africa and come together to see how we could support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really afraid that we've come to the end of the panel, and we've come to the end of the Africa Day. Yes, I am. That's one of the roles I have, to make sure that we stick to the timetable, which we didn't. So I would like to really ask you to give a great hand of applause to the panel. And thank you very much for this. And so we're going to close down. We're going to close. So I would like to ask the panel to take a seat.
Thank you.
And the final words are for the comedian.
Thank you. I will keep it short. Again, a huge applause for the panel, because I was very inspiring. For me, it's an honor to wrap up the day. I will do this in English. So I had a lady come up to me after I did my comedy, said, "You were so funny, but I didn't understand a word." It was all in Dutch. Can you please explain it to me? Next time I will do it in English. Today we were gathered here for Africa Day in the Tropical Museum. And now we are still sitting here in the Tropical Theater. It's hot in here. And that's me saying it as a refugee from Ethiopia. One can blame it on climate change, but a decent air conditioning would also be nice. I watched a couple of programs today at Africa Day, movies, lectures, debates, food was incredible, music, comedy, very inspirational speeches, all were incredible. If I leave today, this beautiful event, this is what I picked up and will take home with me. One thing is, there are a lot of problems in the world right now. And we have labor shortages throughout the Netherlands, Schiphol, nurses, you name it. And I'm self-employed, so I don't have any colleagues. And this message will go out to the youth, the future, because we want the future to be bright. So I have to, I think, employ my new colleague, my 7-year-old son, to my job because we need new workers. And the challenging part of that is that my wife is a Dutch lady and our son is a mix. During the day, our son behaves like a typical African man. He loves stories, knowledge, music, and loves getting hugs. But at night, he behaves like a white man. He has resistance through everything. He has resistance to sleep. Makes noise like a dragon from Games of Thrones. I worry for my son because I want to teach him everything, but I cannot prepare him for the world because I don't know nothing about white privilege. That part I cannot teach him. And he's not really inclusive as well because, yeah, he's a boy. The dilemma that the Dutch people are currently facing is very unique. We have a shortage of labor. Shortage of people who can work. On the other hand, according to a lot of Dutch people, we have too many refugees. You would say the solution is right in front of you. Great idea, Mo, you would say. But the Netherlands would be not the Netherlands if they first started an investigation. Because if the problem is too easy to solve, it's not our thing. No, it's not even worth it for us. So we like to be challenged. We should also, of course, talk about the war. I sympathize with the people who have been affected. There's a lot of fighting every day. And we as Africans are forced to choose a side between the artist Burna Boy or Wizkid, who can call himself the best African artist. I see a lot of people watching me like, huh? Who is Burna Boy? And who is Wizkid? And I can also see that Mr. Bert Koenders is like, huh? I was foreign minister to the Netherlands for many years, but a battle between Burna Boy and Wizkid, I don't know nothing about that, because who's Wizkid? I'm team Burna Boy all day. I think he will sing as well. Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, people are going to Google this joke later. Until you are home, you're like, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, that's a funny joke. Good comedian, Mo Hersty. I really want to thank you all and for today, for your efforts to listen to everybody. And I want to give you all an assignment home. I recently wrote a book. It's called The Inburgeringscursus voor Witte Mensen. It's translated the integration course for white people. This book is not, of course, for just white people, but it's a good book for everybody. In this book, I have an assignment, and I really want to connect the world together with a lot of people. And in this book, I have an assignment for all of you today as well, to connect with 10 people that you have nothing in common with. For the next year, I want all of you to connect with people that you don't know, try to learn their culture, share your values with each other, because the more cultures we can share with each other, the more wealthier and richer we can make this world together. Thank you very much. My name is Mer Hersey, and I wish you all a very good day.